when marine biologist Dr. Victoria Hayes walked into the remote research station on Kodiak Island, Alaska, on March 15, 2015, the scientists present could hardly believe what they were seeing. The woman who had vanished without a trace from a coastal research expedition in June 2011 stood before them, barefoot, her clothing made from seal skin and woven kelp, her face weathered beyond recognition. But what shocked them most was not her appearance. It was the spiral scar burned into her left shoulder, and the words she repeated over and over. The ocean provides. The ocean cleanses. We are vessels of the tide. Dr. Victoria Hayes, 34, was one of the most promising marine biologists in her field when she disappeared nearly 4 years earlier. On June 3, 2011, Victoria departed from Homer, Alaska, aboard a 28-foot research vessel named the Endeavour II, accompanied by fellow researcher Dr. Simon Garrett, 38, and boat captain Thomas Brennan, 52. The 3-person team planned a 2-week expedition to study sea otter populations and kelp forest ecosystems in the remote waters around the Barren Islands, approximately 60 miles southwest of Seward. Victoria had earned her PhD from the University of Washington in 2008, specializing in marine mammal behavior and coastal ecology. Her published research on sea otter foraging patterns had earned recognition from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which partially funded this expedition. Colleagues at the Alaska Sea Life Center, where she worked as a senior researcher, described her as meticulous in her planning and highly experienced in wilderness fieldwork. Dr. Simon Garrett, her research partner, held a doctorate in marine botany from Oregon State University. He had worked with Victoria on 3 previous expeditions and was known for his expertise in kelp forest dynamics. Captain Thomas Brennan, a lifelong Alaskan with 25 years of experience navigating the state's treacherous coastal waters, operated a licensed charter service and had safely guided dozens of research teams through these same waters. The expedition had been planned for 8 months. Victoria submitted a detailed research proposal to NOAA in October 2010, outlining their objectives to establish baseline population counts for sea otters, document kelp forest health, and collect water samples for toxicology analysis. The team obtained all necessary permits from the Alaska Department of Fish and Game and filed a float plan with the U.S. Coast Guard Station in Kodiak. According to the equipment manifest filed with their insurance company, the Endeavour II carried a satellite phone, EPIRB emergency beacon, marine radio, GPS navigation system, flare gun, life raft, and enough provisions for 3 weeks. The vessel's engine had been inspected and certified on May 15, 2011. Both Victoria and Simon had completed wilderness first aid training and cold water survival courses. Victoria's emergency contact was her sister, Dr. Lauren Hayes, a physician in Seattle. Simon listed his wife, Patricia Garrett, who lived in Anchorage. Captain Brennan's contact was his daughter, Michelle Brennan Torres, a schoolteacher in Homer. The research plan involved anchoring in protected coves around the Barren Islands, launching inflatable boats for daily surveys, and setting up temporary monitoring equipment on accessible shorelines. The team expected to be out of cell phone range, but planned to check in via satellite phone every 3 days. Their scheduled return date was June 17, 2011. On June 3, 2011, at 6:15 a.m., security cameras at Homer Harbor captured the Endeavour II departing from slip D27. Victoria can be seen in the footage carrying equipment cases aboard, wearing a red waterproof jacket and baseball cap. Simon follows with a large cooler, and Captain Brennan performs final checks on the vessel. At 8:45 a.m., the harbormaster's radio log records a standard departure communication from Brennan, reporting calm seas and clear visibility. The vessel's AIS transponder showed it traveling southwest at 18 knots, following the planned route. At 11:30 a.m., a commercial fishing vessel, the Pacific Dawn, reported passing the Endeavour II approximately 15 miles northeast of the Barren Islands. Captain Thomas Brecka of the Pacific Dawn later told investigators that he exchanged brief radio greetings with Brennan, who reported all was well and they were on schedule. At 2:40 p.m. on June 3rd, Victoria sent a text message via satellite phone to her sister. Made it to first sight, weather perfect. Saw orcas on the way. Amazing. We'll call in 3 days. That was the last communication anyone received from the expedition. On June 6th, the scheduled check-in date passed with no contact. Lauren Hayes initially assumed the satellite phone had malfunctioned, or weather had prevented communication. By June 7th, when still no word had come, she called the Alaska Sea Life Center, which contacted the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard sector Anchorage received the missing vessel report at 1:15 p.m. on June 7, 2011. Within 2 hours, a Jayhawk helicopter from Air Station Kodiak was searching the last known coordinates. The initial aerial search covered a 40-mile radius around the Barren Islands, focusing on protected coves where the team would likely anchor. Seas were calm with visibility exceeding 10 miles. The helicopter crew spotted nothing. On June 8th, the search expanded to include 2 Coast Guard cutters, the Alert and the Sycamore, along with a C-130 Hercules aircraft equipped with advanced radar and thermal imaging. Volunteer vessels from Homer and Seward joined the effort. The Alaska State Troopers deployed their dive team to check shallow areas around known anchorages. The search grid eventually covered over 400 square nautical miles of ocean and coastline. On June 10th, a significant discovery was made. A fishing crew aboard the vessel Northern Star found the Endeavour II drifting approximately 35 miles west of its last known position, in deep water between the Barren Islands and the Alaska Peninsula. The Coast Guard immediately secured the vessel and towed it to Kodiak for examination. What investigators found aboard raised more questions than answers. The engine was off, but the keys remained in the ignition. Fuel tanks were 3/4 full. The GPS showed the last recorded position was in a cove on the northeast side of East Amatuli Island, logged at 3:17 p.m. on June 3rd, just 37 minutes after Victoria's final text message. All personal belongings were present. Victoria's laptop, camera equipment, Simon's research notes, 3 packed duffel bags of clothing, toiletries, and food supplies nearly untouched. The satellite phone was found in its charger, fully functional. The EPIRB emergency beacon had not been activated. Life jackets hung in their storage compartment. The life raft remained secured to the deck. Most puzzling was the inflatable research boat. It was gone, along with 1 set of oars, a water sampling kit, and Victoria's field notebook. In the main cabin, investigators found a meal partially prepared: bread, cheese, and sliced vegetables on the galley counter, along with a pot of water on the stove that had boiled dry. 3 coffee cups sat on the table, 2 empty, 1 still half full. A jacket identified as belonging to Captain Brennan was draped over a chair. The anchor was up, the mooring lines were neatly coiled, and there were no signs of distress, struggle, or emergency. The official Coast Guard investigation, led by Lieutenant Commander Patricia Hayes, produced a detailed 47-page report. Naval architects examined the hull and found no evidence of collision, grounding, or structural failure. The engine showed no mechanical problems. Weather records confirmed conditions had been favorable throughout June 3rd and 4th. Light winds, calm seas, no storms. Toxicology tests on the remaining food and water found no contaminants. The abandoned meal suggested the crew had left suddenly, but the presence of personal items and the disabled emergency beacon suggested they expected to return. The missing inflatable boat indicated at least 1 person had departed in it, but why and where the others went remained unknown. Marine search operations continued for 21 days, eventually covering over 2,000 square nautical miles. Divers searched the waters around East Amatuli Island, where the GPS last recorded a position. Shore teams walked every accessible beach in the Barren Islands, searching for wreckage, bodies, or any sign of the missing researchers. Aircraft with thermal imaging flew grid patterns over the island's interiors. Nothing was found. On June 28, 2011, the active search was officially called off. Dr. Victoria Chen, Dr. Simon Webb, and Captain James Brennan were presumed lost at sea. The official conclusion cited unexplained maritime incident as the cause, with drowning as the most probable manner of death, though the specific circumstances could not be determined. The families challenged this conclusion. Lauren Hayes hired maritime attorney David Kowalski, who filed for an independent investigation. In September 2011, private investigator and former Navy SR specialist Robert Marsh spent 2 weeks in the Barren Islands, interviewing fishermen, examining tide patterns, and searching remote beaches. He found scattered pieces of debris, a blue tarp fragment, a plastic water bottle, pieces of rope, but nothing definitively linked to the Endeavour II or its crew. Marsh's 30-page report noted the statistical improbability of 3 experienced individuals vanishing simultaneously in good weather with no distress signal, no emergency beacon activation, and no bodies recovered. He wrote, "The evidence suggests a rapid, unexpected event that prevented any communication but also prevented panic sufficient to trigger emergency protocols. This profile is inconsistent with typical maritime casualties. The Alaska State Medical Examiner, without bodies or conclusive evidence of death, delayed issuing death certificates. Life insurance companies refused to pay out claims. For months, the families existed in bureaucratic limbo, unable to grieve, unable to move forward. Finally, in March 2012, after legal pressure and formal hearings, death certificates were issued for all 3 individuals with a date of death listed as June 3, 2011, and manner of death as presumed drowning by misadventure. Lauren Hayes received a life insurance payment of $350,000 in May 2012. Patricia Garrett received $400,000 in July 2012. Lisa Brennan Martinez received her father's $275,000 policy in August 2012. The Endeavour II was sold at auction in October 2012. The case faded from public attention. Between 2011 and 2015, the waters around Kodiak Island saw 8 other incidents involving small vessels. In August 2012, a kayaker disappeared near Shuyak Island and was never found. In May 2013, 2 fishermen survived 3 days in a life raft after their boat sank. In September 2013, a charter boat ran aground in fog, but all passengers were rescued. None of these incidents involved the strange circumstances that had marked the Endeavour II disappearance. The Alaska Sea Life Center created a memorial fund in Victoria, is named to support young women entering marine biology. Simon Webb's wife moved to Oregon to live with her sister. Captain Brennan's daughter scattered his ashes at sea in Homer Harbor, though no body had ever been found. Life continued, the mystery unsolved, the ocean keeping its secrets. Then on March 15, 2015, at 9:20 a.m., everything changed. Dr. Thomas Vickers, a wildlife biologist conducting a routine brown bear population survey on the southwestern coast of Kodiak Island, was walking along a remote beach when he noticed smoke rising from the tree line approximately 200 yards inland. The area, known as Ugak Bay, was uninhabited and rarely visited except by hunters and researchers. Vickers, 48, had worked in Alaska for 22 years and knew that smoke in such a remote location was unusual. Concerned it might be a distress signal or an illegal campsite, he approached cautiously. What he found would later be described in his official report as a scene that defied rational explanation. A shelter constructed from driftwood, kelp, and seal hides stood in a small clearing. Smoke rose from a carefully built fire pit surrounded by stones. Hanging from branches were strips of dried fish and seal meat. On the ground lay various tools, bone needles, stone scrapers, woven kelp rope, and sharpened shells. And sitting cross-legged before the fire, tending it with a stick, was a woman. Vickers called out a greeting. The woman turned slowly, her movements deliberate and calm. Her face was deeply tanned and weathered, her hair long and matted, woven with small shells and feathers. She wore a garment that appeared to be made from seal skin stitched together with sinew. Her feet were bare, the soles thick and calloused. When she stood, Vickers noticed extensive scarring on her arms and a distinctive spiral burn mark on her left shoulder. He asked if she needed help. She stared at him for a long moment, then spoke in a voice that seemed unused to speaking. "The ocean provides. The ocean cleanses. We are vessels of the tide." Vickers attempted to communicate further, asking her name if she was injured, how long she had been there. She responded only by repeating the same phrase, her eyes focused on something beyond him, toward the water. Recognizing that the woman was in some form of psychological distress, Vickers used his satellite phone to contact the Coast Guard station in Kodiak. He remained at a respectful distance, speaking gently, offering her water from his bottle. She accepted it but did not drink, instead pouring it onto the ground in a slow, ritualistic manner. At 11:45 a.m., a Coast Guard helicopter arrived. Paramedics Lauren Mitchell and Eric Torres approached the woman with extreme caution. Mitchell later reported, "Her vital signs were remarkably stable given her apparent condition. Pulse was 68 beats per minute, blood pressure 110/72, temperature 36.8 degrees Celsius. She was clearly malnourished but not in immediate medical distress. What was most disturbing was her affect, completely flat, emotionless, as if she were performing actions from memory rather than volition." The woman did not resist when paramedics guided her toward the helicopter, but she insisted on collecting several items from her shelter: a carved piece of driftwood, a small pouch made from seal intestine, and a necklace of shells and bones. During the flight to Kodiak Island Medical Center, she sat motionless, the carved driftwood clutched in both hands, lips moving in silent repetition of the same phrase. At Providence Kodiak Island Medical Center, Dr. Elena Rodriguez conducted an emergency evaluation. The patient was approximately 5'6", weight 98 pounds, severely underweight for her height and frame. Physical examination revealed extensive scarring, healed lacerations on her forearms, circular burn marks on both shoulders, and what appeared to be ritual cutting patterns on her chest. Her hands showed thick calluses consistent with manual labor. Her feet were heavily calloused, indicating years of barefoot walking. Dental examination found no recent decay but significant wear on her molars. Blood tests showed severe vitamin D deficiency, moderate anemia, elevated cortisol levels, and traces of several unidentified alkaloids in her system. X-rays revealed healed fractures of the left wrist and 2 ribs, injuries at least 2 years old. A brain MRI showed no structural abnormalities, ruling out tumor or stroke. Dr. Rodriguez noted in her report, "Patient presents with signs of prolonged physical hardship, ritual scarring, and profound psychological dissociation. She responds to basic commands, but verbal communication is limited to repetitive phrases. Eye contact is minimal. She exhibits behaviors consistent with cult indoctrination or extended traumatic captivity." Psychiatrist Dr. William Frost was called for consultation. During his initial assessment on March 16th, the patient sat motionless for 40 minutes, occasionally touching the spiral burn on her shoulder. When asked her name, she eventually whispered, "Victoria." The ocean gave me that name. When shown a mirror, she showed no recognition of her own reflection. When asked where she had been, she replied, "Below the tide line, where the truth lives, where the Father teaches." Frost immediately recognized the potential significance. He contacted the Kodiak Police Department and requested a comparison with missing persons databases. On March 17th, fingerprint analysis confirmed what seemed impossible. The woman found in the wilderness shelter was Dr. Victoria Chen, who had been presumed dead for nearly 4 years. The notification to Lauren Hayes came at 2:30 p.m. on March 17, 2015. Lauren was in surgery at Seattle Grace Hospital when she received the call from Alaska State Troopers Detective Sarah Kovalchuk. She later told reporters, "I thought it was a cruel hoax. I had buried my sister, not literally, but in every way that mattered. I had mourned her. I had moved on. And then they tell me she's alive? That she's been alive this entire time. I couldn't process it." Lauren flew to Kodiak that same night, arriving at 11 p.m. The reunion took place the following morning in the psychiatric ward, supervised by Dr. Frost and Detective Kovalchuk. Victoria sat in a chair by the window, staring at the ocean visible in the distance. When Lauren entered and spoke her name, Victoria turned slowly. For several minutes she showed no recognition. Then something shifted in her expression, a flicker of memory, of connection. She reached out and touched Lauren's face with one hand, tracing the contours as if verifying she was real. "Lauren," she whispered. "Lauren is the name from before the water, before the Father." Then she began to cry, silent tears running down her weathered face, her body shaking with sobs that seemed to come from years of suppressed emotion. Lauren held her sister for over an hour, while Victoria wept, repeating fragments of memories. Coffee on the boat, Simon laughing, the orcas. I remember the orcas. The investigation into Victoria's disappearance was immediately reopened. Detective Kovalchuk, a 16-year veteran of the Alaska State Troopers with extensive experience in missing persons cases, took lead. The FBI sent Special Agent Michael Torres from the Anchorage field office, given the potential for kidnapping and unlawful imprisonment. Over the following week, Victoria's condition gradually stabilized. With medication to manage her anxiety and support from Lauren and medical staff, fragments of memory began to emerge, though her account remained disjointed and difficult to verify. The first coherent testimony came on March 22, during a recorded interview with Detective Kovalchuk and Agent Torres. Victoria's lawyer, appointed by Lauren, was present, along with Dr. Frost. Victoria spoke slowly, often pausing for minutes at a time, her fingers constantly working the carved driftwood she refused to be parted from. According to Victoria, on June 3, 2011, after sending her final text message to Lauren, the team had anchored in a cove on East Amatuli Island to conduct initial surveys. Simon wanted to collect kelp samples from a rocky outcrop visible about 300 yards from shore. He and Captain Brennan took the inflatable boat, planning to be gone for 30 minutes. Victoria remained aboard the Endeavour too, preparing lunch and organizing equipment. She heard no distress call, no shouts, no sounds of struggle. After 45 minutes, when the men hadn't returned, she went to the deck and scanned the shoreline with binoculars. The inflatable boat was visible, pulled up on the beach, but Simon and Brennan were nowhere to be seen. Growing concerned, Victoria called out on the marine radio. No response. She decided to investigate. Using the second, smaller inflatable kayak stored on the Endeavour II, she paddled toward the beach. She pulled the kayak up beside the research boat and called out for Simon and Brennan. The island was silent except for seabirds and waves. She walked inland about 50 yards, following footprints in the sand that led toward a rocky area thick with Sitka spruce. That's when she saw them. 4 people emerged from the trees, 3 men and 1 woman, all dressed in clothes made from animal hides and kelp, their faces painted with white ash in geometric patterns. They carried tools, sharpened whalebones, stone blades, carved wooden staffs. Before Victoria could react, they surrounded her. One of them, a tall man with a long white beard and eyes that Victoria described as burning with absolute certainty, spoke to her in English. "The ocean has delivered you. You are called. You are chosen. You will be cleansed." Victoria screamed and tried to run. 2 of the men grabbed her, covering her mouth with a piece of leather. She fought, kicking and thrashing, but they were strong and moved with practiced coordination. They bound her wrists with kelp rope and began dragging her deeper into the forest. Through gaps in the trees, Victoria caught a glimpse of the beach. Simon and Captain Brennan were there, also bound, being led by more members of the group toward a narrow trail leading up the island's rocky interior. The group moved quickly through difficult terrain, following paths invisible to anyone unfamiliar with the island. Victoria tried to memorize landmarks, a lightning-struck tree, a distinctive rock formation, but panic and exhaustion soon overwhelmed her ability to track where they were going. After what she estimated was 2 hours of hiking, they reached a cave system on the western side of the island, hidden behind a waterfall that tumbled from a cliff face into a narrow gorge. The cave entrance was completely invisible from the ocean or air, camouflaged by the falling water and dense vegetation. Inside, torches made from seal fat and driftwood illuminated a complex network of tunnels carved and expanded over what must have been decades. The walls were covered in paintings, spirals, waves, marine creatures, human figures in various poses of submission and worship. In the central chamber stood an altar made from whale bones arranged in a circle, surrounded by offerings, dried fish, shells, carved totems, and what appeared to be human hair braided into long ropes. The leader of the group, the man with the white beard, introduced himself as Father Nathaniel. He explained that they were the cleansed, a community of individuals who had rejected the corrupted modern world and returned to the true way of living in harmony with the ocean's will. According to Father Nathaniel, the ocean was a sentient entity that communicated through visions and signs to those pure enough to listen. He claimed to have received his calling in 1993 after surviving a shipwreck that killed 11 other crew members. The ocean, he said, had spared him for a purpose, to gather the chosen ones and prepare them for a great transformation, when the ocean would reclaim the earth and wash away humanity's sins. The group had been living in the caves for over 15 years, surviving on fish, seals, seabirds, and kelp. They numbered 14 individuals, 8 men and 6 women, ranging from a teenager named Caleb, who had been born in the community, to an elderly woman named Sister Miriam, who claimed to be 67 years old. Most had arrived as willing converts, seekers who had abandoned their former lives. But some, like Victoria, had been delivered by the ocean, the group's term for kidnapping. Simon and Captain Brennan were brought to the same chamber. Father Nathaniel performed a ritual he called the welcoming, which involved anointing each captive's forehead with ash mixed with seal blood, while chanting phrases in a language Victoria didn't recognize, possibly Alutiiq or a fabricated ceremonial tongue. He explained that they would undergo cleansing, a process of physical and spiritual purification that would strip away their false identities and prepare them to receive the ocean's wisdom. The cleansing began immediately. All personal items were taken and burned in a ceremonial fire. Their clothes were removed and replaced with crude garments made from seal hide. They were separated into different sections of the cave system, each assigned a guide who would oversee their transformation. Victoria was placed under the supervision of a woman named Sister Deborah, a former schoolteacher from Washington State who claimed to have joined the group in 2005. The daily routine was rigorous and deliberately disorienting. Victoria and the other captives woke before dawn, summoned by the beating of a drum made from stretched sealskin. They participated in a purification ritual that involved standing in ice-cold ocean water for 15 minutes, while reciting mantras taught by Father Nathaniel. The ocean provides, the ocean cleanses, we are vessels of the tide. Breakfast consisted of kelp broth and small portions of dried fish. Then came work, gathering food, processing sealskins, repairing tools, maintaining the cave system, and expanding the altar chamber by chipping away at the rock walls with stone implements. The work was grueling, deliberately exhausting. Midday brought another ritual, the offering, where each member of the community placed an object into a stone basin, a shell, a piece of carved bone, sometimes their own blood drawn with a sharpened fish spine. Afternoons were devoted to instruction. Father Nathaniel taught the group his interpretation of the ocean's messages, weaving together fragments of Christianity, indigenous Alaskan spirituality, environmentalism, and his own apocalyptic visions. He spoke for hours, his voice hypnotic, his eyes intense, describing the coming day when the ice would melt, the seas would rise, and only the cleansed would survive by becoming children of the water. Evenings included communal meals, more kelp, fish, occasional seal meat, followed by singing and storytelling meant to reinforce group cohesion and ideology. Resistance was met with punishment. When Simon tried to escape during the second week, he was caught within hours. The group knew every inch of the island's terrain and could track movement through sounds and disturbed vegetation. His punishment was public and brutal. He was bound to a post in the central chamber, and Father Nathaniel burned a spiral pattern into his shoulder with a heated stone, marking him as one who doubts. The entire community was forced to watch as Simon screamed. Afterward, Father Nathaniel explained calmly, "Pain is the ocean's language. Through suffering, we are refined. Through refinement, we are made worthy." Captain Brennan lasted 6 months before he attempted to fight back. In December 2011, during a particularly harsh winter storm, he tried to overpower his guard and flee into the forest. He was subdued by multiple members of the group and brought before Father Nathaniel. What happened next, Victoria struggled to describe even years later. Father Nathaniel declared that Brennan's resistance proved he was unredeemable, his spirit too corrupted by the old world to accept cleansing. He ordered a ritual called the Return to the Source. Brennan was tied to a wooden frame and carried to the edge of a cliff overlooking the ocean during high tide. Father Nathaniel spoke a long prayer. Then the frame was pushed over the edge. Victoria heard Brennan's scream cut short by the impact, with rocks and water below. Father Nathaniel told the community, "The ocean has judged him and taken him back. We do not mourn. We do not question. The ocean's will is absolute." After Brennan's death, Victoria's will to resist crumbled. She fell into a state of numb compliance, a psychological defense mechanism Dr. Frost would later identify as dissociative survival mode. She performed the rituals mechanically, worked without complaint, and slowly began to internalize the group's beliefs, not out of genuine conversion, but because accepting the reality of her situation felt less painful than fighting it. Simon deteriorated differently. He became withdrawn, barely speaking, his eyes vacant. By the spring of 2012, he rarely left his sleeping area except when forced. In June 2012, exactly 1 year after their capture, Simon stopped eating. Despite Father Nathaniel's efforts to force-feed him, he grew weaker each day. On June 18, 2012, Simon died in his sleep. Father Nathaniel declared it a spiritual transcendence, that Simon had achieved such purity he had become one with the water, even while on land. His body was carried to the ocean and released during high tide, weighted with stones. Victoria watched from the cliff as the body sank beneath the waves. Something broke in her that day, but also something hardened. She resolved to survive, not through resistance but through strategic compliance. She would become what they wanted her to be, at least outwardly, and wait for an opportunity. Over the following years, Victoria learned the skills necessary to survive in the group. She became proficient at fish preservation, hide tanning, and tool-making. She memorized the rituals and prayers, performing them with apparent devotion. She allowed Sister Deborah to burn the spiral mark into her shoulder during a ceremony in August 2013, showing no emotion as the heated stone seared her skin. Internally, she kept a part of herself separate, hidden. She counted days by scratching marks on a small piece of bone she hid in her bedding. She rehearsed memories of her former life, Lauren's laugh, the smell of coffee, the feel of a computer keyboard, the sound of orcas breathing. She told herself stories about her research, imagining what discoveries she would make if she ever escaped. This internal world kept her sane even as her external life became increasingly alien. Father Nathaniel, pleased with her apparent transformation, gave her more responsibility. She was allowed to participate in teaching newer members, to lead certain rituals, to work with less supervision. By 2014, she had been in captivity for 3 years and had gained a degree of trust within the community. The opportunity for escape came unexpectedly in March 2015. A severe storm system battered the island for 4 days straight, the worst weather the group had experienced in years. The cave system, normally secure, began to flood as water poured through cracks in the rock. Part of the tunnel system collapsed, blocking access to the main chamber. The community was forced to evacuate to a secondary shelter, a less secure location about a mile inland. In the chaos of the evacuation, with rain obscuring visibility and the group scattered across the forest in small clusters, Victoria saw her chance. She was helping carry supplies with 2 other women when a particularly violent gust of wind knocked over a large spruce tree, blocking the trail and separating her from her companions. In the confusion, she veered off the path and ran. She ran blindly through the storm, tripping over roots, crashing through underbrush, her bare feet cut and bleeding. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs gave out, and then she crawled, putting as much distance as possible between herself and the community. She had no plan, no destination, no supplies. She only knew she had to move. After hours of struggling through the forest, she found a small ravine where she could shelter from the worst of the wind. She stayed there for 2 days, hungry, cold, terrified, that Father Nathaniel's searchers would find her. But they didn't come. Perhaps the storm was too severe. Perhaps they assumed she had drowned or been killed by falling trees. Or perhaps, without their leader's direct orders, the group was too disorganized to mount an effective search. When the storm finally passed, Victoria emerged from the ravine. She had no idea where she was on the island, but she knew the ocean was to the west, and she knew that if she could reach the coast, she might find help. Using techniques she had learned from the cleansed, reading moss growth on trees, following water drainage, tracking the angle of sunlight, she navigated toward the western shore. It took her 3 days of careful movement, hiding during the day, traveling at dawn and dusk to avoid being seen. She survived by eating kelp washed up on beaches, catching small crabs in tide pools, and drinking from streams. On the 3rd day, she reached a stretch of coastline she didn't recognize but which appeared unoccupied. Exhausted and disoriented, she used skills learned in captivity to build a rudimentary shelter from driftwood and kelp, to start a fire using a bow drill method Father Nathaniel had taught, to begin the process of surviving alone. She stayed in that shelter for 5 days, too afraid to move, too traumatized to think clearly about what to do next. Part of her wondered if she should try to signal for help. Another part of her, the part shaped by 4 years of indoctrination, whispered that maybe the outside world was worse, that maybe Father Nathaniel had been right about the corruption and emptiness of modern life. She was trapped between 2 realities, unable to fully commit to either. That's when Dr. Thomas Vickers found her, tending her fire, caught between past and present, between captivity and freedom. The investigation into the cleansed community began in earnest on March 18, 2015. A joint task force was assembled, including Alaska State Troopers, FBI, Coast Guard, and the Alaska Bureau of Investigation. Special Agent Torres coordinated with the Kodiak Police Department to organize a multi-agency operation. On March 20th, a 15-person team including tactical officers, forensic specialists, and search and rescue personnel departed for East Amatoli Island. They carried detailed maps Victoria had helped sketch from memory, showing the approximate location of the cave system and the secondary shelter. The weather was cold but clear, with good visibility. At 10:30 a.m., the team reached the area Victoria had described. They found the cave entrance exactly where she had indicated, hidden behind the waterfall. Inside, the scene matched her testimony with eerie precision. The central chamber contained the whalebone altar, now partially collapsed from water damage. Wall paintings covered every surface: spirals, oceanic symbols, human figures in submissive poses. Fire pits showed recent use. Sleeping areas were carved into the rock, each lined with sealskins and kelp bedding. Tools were organized on stone shelves: bone needles, stone knives, scrapers made from shells, wooden carvings. In a side chamber, investigators found a journal. The cover was made from tanned sealskin, the pages from bleached kelp paper. The handwriting was precise, dated entries spanning from September 1998 to February 2015. The author identified himself as Nathaniel Cord, former merchant marine, born in Oregon in 1956. The early entries described his survival of the 1993 shipwreck and his interpretation of that event as a divine calling. Later entries detailed the formation of the cleansed community, the arrival of various members, and his increasingly grandiose visions of environmental apocalypse and spiritual transformation. Interspersed with philosophical writings were practical notes, food storage techniques, weather patterns, observations of Coast Guard patrol routes, and, most disturbingly, records of deliverances. The journal confirmed that Simon Webb and James Brennan had been taken in June 2011, that Brennan had died in December 2011, and that Simon had died in June 2012. But those weren't the only names. Forensic teams searching deeper chambers found human remains. In a natural depression used as a burial site, they discovered 6 sets of bones, carefully arranged and marked with carved wooden plaques. Preliminary analysis suggested the remains belonged to 3 males and 3 females of various ages, buried over a span of approximately 15 years. DNA analysis would eventually identify 2 of the remains. Simon Garrett, and a woman named Jennifer Hartley, a 32-year-old environmental activist from Seattle who had disappeared while kayaking near Afognak Island in 2008. Her case had been closed as a presumed drowning. The other 4 individuals remained unidentified, though forensic anthropologists estimated their deaths had occurred between 1999 and 2010. Among the possessions found in the cave were personal items that clearly didn't belong to the community's primitive lifestyle. A California driver's license issued to a David Morrison in 2003, a waterproof watch engraved with the initials MR, a wedding ring, and fragments of modern clothing buried beneath rock and debris. Each item represented a possible victim, someone who had vanished into the wilderness and never returned. But the community members themselves were gone. The secondary shelter Victoria had mentioned was found abandoned. Recent footprints and disturbed vegetation suggested the group had left in haste, possibly within days of Victoria's escape. Search teams scoured the island for a week, checking every beach, cave, and possible hiding place. They found scattered camps, evidence of temporary shelters, but no people. On March 28th, a fishing vessel reported seeing a large group of people in primitive boats approximately 40 miles southeast of Kodiak Island, heading toward the Alaska Peninsula. By the time the Coast Guard reached the location, the group had vanished. Some investigators believed the cleansed had dispersed, members fleeing individually to avoid capture. Others theorized they had relocated to an even more remote location, perhaps in the vast wilderness of the Alaska Peninsula or the Aleutian Islands, areas where thousands of uninhabited islands and countless hidden coves could shelter a small, resourceful group indefinitely. Nathaniel Cord's journal contained a contingency plan for exactly this scenario, titled The Scattering. If the corrupted world finds our sanctuary, we will not be captured. We will disperse like water flowing into new vessels. The ocean is vast. The ocean provides sanctuary to the faithful. They may find our dwellings, but they will never find our spirit. The FBI issued warrants for Nathaniel Cord and 13 other individuals identified through Victoria's testimony and items found in the cave. Their names and descriptions were circulated throughout Alaska, the Pacific Northwest, and nationally. Reward money totaling $100,000 was offered for information leading to arrests, but months passed with no credible sightings. In July 2015, a brief break in the case occurred. A man matching Nathaniel Cord's description was spotted in a remote area near Lake Iliamna, approximately 200 miles from Kodiak. State troopers and FBI agents converged on the location, but by the time they arrived, the man was gone. They found a recently abandoned campsite with familiar markings, spiral patterns carved into trees, a stone altar, dried fish hanging from branches. It seemed Cord was still out there, still practicing his rituals, possibly still recruiting or taking new victims. Victoria's recovery was slow and painful. She remained at Providence Kodiak Island Medical Center for 6 weeks, undergoing intensive psychiatric treatment. Dr. Frost diagnosed her with complex post-traumatic stress disorder, dissociative identity symptoms, and what he termed ideological trauma, psychological damage from prolonged indoctrination. She experienced severe nightmares, flashbacks triggered by the sound of waves or the smell of ocean water, and episodes of depersonalization where she felt disconnected from her own body. Reintegration into normal life was difficult. Modern technology, smartphones, computers, televisions, overwhelmed her with stimuli. Grocery stores with their fluorescent lights and endless choices triggered panic attacks. She couldn't sleep in an enclosed room without a window showing the outside. She refused to eat fish for months. In May 2015, Victoria was transferred to a specialized trauma treatment facility in Seattle to be closer to Lauren. There, she worked with therapists who had experience treating cult survivors and hostages. Treatment included cognitive behavioral therapy, EMDR for trauma processing, and gradual exposure therapy to help her readjust to society. Group therapy with other trauma survivors helped her understand she wasn't alone in her struggles. By August 2015, Victoria had progressed enough to move into a supervised apartment. Lauren visited daily, helping her sister navigate a world that felt simultaneously familiar and alien. Victoria could go for hours talking normally, discussing memories from before the abduction, showing flashes of her old personality and sharp scientific mind. Then, without warning, she would fall silent, her hand unconsciously moving to touch the spiral scar on her shoulder, her lips moving in silent repetition of prayers she claimed to no longer believe. Dr. Frost noted in his October 2015 assessment, patient continues to struggle with divided identity. Intellectually, she rejects the cleansed ideology and recognizes it as a trauma-induced delusion. Emotionally, 4 years of conditioning have left deep psychological imprints that manifest as intrusive thoughts, compulsive behaviors, and occasional expressions of longing for the simplicity of her captivity. This paradox, simultaneously hating and missing one's captors and the captive environment, is common in long-term hostage situations and represents one of the most challenging aspects of recovery. The legal case against the cleansed community remained open, but stagnant. Without apprehending Nathaniel Cord or other members, prosecutors had no one to charge. The deaths of Simon Garrett, Thomas Brennan, and Jennifer Hartley were ruled as homicides, but the perpetrators remained at large. In November 2015, the FBI officially added Nathaniel Cord to their most wanted list for kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, and murder. His photograph, aged from a driver's license photo taken in 1992, appeared on wanted posters throughout Alaska. But Alaska is vast, and for someone with Cord's survival skills and paranoid preparation, disappearing into its wilderness is entirely possible. As of the case's closure in early 2016, Cord and the remaining cleansed members had not been found. Some law enforcement officials believe the group is still active, operating from a hidden location, possibly with new victims. Others think the community disbanded, members either returning to society under false identities or dying in the harsh wilderness. A third theory suggests they may have left Alaska entirely, relocating to remote areas of Canada or even international waters aboard a vessel, continuing their isolated existence beyond the reach of authorities. Victoria herself believes they're still out there. In an interview with Agent Torres in December 2015, she said, "Father Nathaniel planned for this. He always said the ocean would protect the faithful. He has caches of supplies hidden across the islands. He knows how to avoid detection. And he's not alone. There were 13 others, and most of them were completely devoted. They won't give up. They'll find a new sanctuary, and they'll keep taking people, because that's what they believe the ocean wants them to do." 4 other missing persons cases in coastal Alaska between 2011 and 2015 are now being reviewed for possible connections to the cleansed. In October 2013, a solo hiker named Trevor Michaels vanished near Katmai National Park. In July 2014, marine researchers Elizabeth and John Forrester disappeared while studying salmon runs on the Alaska Peninsula. In both cases, searches found abandoned equipment and no bodies. Patterns eerily similar to the Endeavour II incident. DNA samples from the unidentified remains found in the cave are being compared against missing persons databases nationwide. But the degradation of genetic material and limited reference samples have made identification slow. As of 2016, 2 of the 4 unidentified victims remain nameless, their families unaware of their fate. The Alaska Department of Fish and Game has implemented new protocols for researchers working in remote coastal areas. Mandatory GPS tracking, daily check-ins via satellite, and 2-person minimum team sizes are now required. The Coast Guard has increased patrol frequency around the Barren Islands and Kodiak Archipelago. But Alaska's coastline stretches over 33,000 miles with thousands of islands, countless hidden coves, and vast areas accessible only by boat or plane. Monitoring it all is impossible. Victoria Chen's story has raised uncomfortable questions about how many other isolated groups might exist in Alaska's wilderness. Environmental groups, survivalist communities, and individuals seeking to escape modern society are not uncommon in the state. Most are harmless, but the line between choosing isolation and enforcing it on others, between spiritual seeking and dangerous delusion, between alternative lifestyle and criminal cult, can be dangerously thin. In March 2016, Victoria gave her only public statement, a written testimony released through her lawyer. She wrote, "I survived 4 years of captivity by forgetting who I was. Now I survive freedom by trying to remember. Every day is a choice to believe that the world I knew before was real, that the life I'm building now is possible. Some days that choice is easy. Some days it feels impossible. To the families of Simon and James, I am deeply sorry. I watched them suffer and I could not save them. I will carry that guilt forever. To anyone reading this who might know something about the cleansed or Nathaniel Cord, please come forward. There may be others still trapped, still suffering, still waiting for rescue. And to the survivors of trauma, wherever you are not alone. Recovery is not linear. Some days you will feel broken beyond repair, but you are stronger than your worst moments, braver than your deepest fears. Keep choosing life. Keep choosing yourself. Victoria now lives quietly in the Pacific Northwest, her exact location kept confidential for her safety and privacy. According to Lauren, she has begun volunteering with organizations that support cult survivors and human trafficking victims, using her experience to help others navigate recovery. She has not returned to marine biology research and says she may never be able to go near the ocean again without triggering severe trauma responses. But she is alive. She is free. And every day she remains that way is a victory. The case of Dr. Victoria Chen and the cleansed community remains open. The FBI continues to investigate leads, though they have become increasingly rare. The families of the victims have formed a support network, advocating for better tracking systems for researchers and harsher penalties for those who commit crimes in remote areas where jurisdiction and enforcement are complicated. The wilderness of Alaska keeps its secrets. Somewhere in its vast expanse, Nathaniel Cord and his followers may still be living their isolated existence, believing themselves chosen, awaiting an apocalypse that will never come. And somewhere in that same wilderness, there may be others, captives, victims, people who walked into the trees or sailed into the fog and never came back. Their stories are waiting to be discovered if anyone can find them, if anyone survives long enough to tell them. Victoria Chen did. Against all odds, against years of suffering and indoctrination and isolation, she found her way back. But the cost of that survival, the memories she cannot erase, the scars, both visible and invisible, the knowledge of what human beings can do to each other when civilization's thin veneer is stripped away, that cost will be with her forever. The ocean, she once told Lauren, does not forget. Neither does she.